Hello and welcome to StratNews Global. I'm Nitin Gokhale and I'm privileged to join Professor Kishore Mahbubani from Singapore, who of course needs no introduction, very distinguished diplomat for long years with the Singapore Foreign Service and for the last 15 years now, a very revered academic and policy analyst. Welcome to this program, Professor Mahbubani.
Yeah, happy to join you.
Thank you very much, sir. Let me start with your book, which seems so well timed, and it's right behind you there. Has China won? And it says it talks about the geopolitical contest between the United States and China, and it seems that Chinese are have got the better of the United States, or at least you've posed that question. Can you elaborate what has been your thesis and what has been your prognosis in this book?
Well, when you write a book with a question mark, it says, Has China won? I shouldn't give you the answer because if I give you the answer, you won't buy the book.
Yeah, certainly.
Well, I'll be nice. I'm Indian. I'll give you the answer.
Sure. Thank you.
The answer to the question, Has China won? Is no.
Okay.
Or more accurately, not yet. And the reason why I wrote this book at this stage is because I consider myself a friend of America and also a friend of China. And I've noticed that the United States has decided to launch a major geopolitical contest against China. This is normal superpower behavior whenever your leading competitor is getting close to you. But what is tragic, and this is an insight that Henry Kissinger gave to me at a one-on-one lunch I had with him in New York 2 years ago. He said it's a bit sad that the United States has decided to launch this geopolitical contest against China without first working out a comprehensive long-term strategy. And I think that's very unwise on the part of the United States because it is true the United States has been by far the number one power for a century or more. In fact, the 20th century was the American century. It defeated Imperial Germany in World War One. It won World War Two. It defeated the Soviet Union. It overcame the Japanese challenge. So the Americans got used to winning and said, "Ha! Another contest, we'll win." But I think the mistake they're making is that China is a far more formidable competitor than any they've had so far. China's population is 4 times the size of the United States. United States is less than 250 years old. China can at least count a civilization history of at least 4,000 years. And so, at a time when China is experiencing one of its greatest resurgence and renaissance periods ever in its history, the United States has sort of, in some ways, as I say, blundered into a geopolitical contest without thinking about it. So my book is an effort to help my American friends think through the consequences of doing something like this.
And I think in that chat with Dr. Henry Kissinger, I think you also mentioned in one of the introductions I read or the synopsis of the book, I think you or him point out to the fact that the United States went into the Cold War very well prepared after due deliberation, which they haven't done in this case. Right?
Absolutely. In fact, the man who was the key strategist for the United States at the beginning of the Cold War was George Kennan. And actually, I also met him, by the way, in late 1990s. And George Kennan gave his fellow Americans very good pieces of advice, and there are at least four I think I cite. Number one, he said, at the end of the day, the outcome of the contest will not be determined by military weapons. It
Yes.
will be determined by the domestic spiritual vitality of our society. And here the sad part is that if he were alive today, he'd be very saddened to see that America is the only major developed society where the average income of the bottom 50% has gone down over a 30-year period. In the same period, the bottom 50% in China have had the best 40 years in 4,000 years. So it's like there are two people, sort of, one going down,
Yes.
one going up. And at the same time, he also said, George Kennan, cultivate friends and allies.
Yeah.
As you know, President Trump is not doing it, sadly. And even with a country like India, right, insisting that he will impose sanctions on India if you don't supply chloroquine or the
Yes, HCQ to in short,
yes,
the
yes,
tablets.
yes.
Yeah.
And then the other piece of advice that George Kennan gave was don't insult the Soviet Union because at the end of the day, you still got to work with the Soviet Union. And as you know, the Americans are now insulting China left, right, and center. And
Exactly.
that's unwise. And of course, the final piece of advice that he gave to his fellow American George Kennan was he said, be humble.
Absolutely.
And
Which
that's very wise advice, you know. So what I'm saying is that if I think if Kennan were alive today, he would say he would repeat these 4 points. I think, even when it comes
exactly.
to dealing with China.
That's true, and I think it is true of life also, and the way we interact with each other. So nations must take lessons from its own history, which the Americans don't seem to be taking. But let me come to the current situation now, sir, about the COVID-19 and the initial missteps that China really took when the virus was raging through Wuhan and the Hubei province. But now they seem to have got their act together, although the world now seems to be pushing back against China, some of it contrived, some of it orchestrated. How do you think the geopolitical scenario will shape up once this virus abates a little bit or it's gone down, its effects are lessened? What is your prognosis on that?
Well, I would say it's very dangerous to make any clear predictions about the post-COVID-19 world because we are not out of it. We are to put it to use a military metaphor. We are still in the thick of the battle, so we are surrounded by the fog of war, and frankly, we do not know what the final outcome will be. So, for example, right now, clearly, China has handled COVID-19 far more competently than the United States has done so. But if the United States somehow or other, through it, with its best universities in the world, best scientific institute, suddenly comes up with a miracle cure for COVID-19, the whole world will say, "Thank God we have America." You know, so I would say it is still possible that America can come out of this looking much stronger. But
Hmm.
sadly, the evidence so far shows that actually it's not just China, but the East Asian societies have done much better in managing COVID 19. And if you just look at one statistic, number of deaths per million, in Spain is over 500, Italy close to 500, UK 3 to 400, US 200. But when you come to East Asia, the figures for all the countries are below 10. 5 for Japan, 4 for South Korea, 5 for China, 2 for Singapore, 0 for.
Taiwan. Yeah.
And it's very strange. You know, in the past, if this had happened, as I said in the
Hmm.
article in The Economist, if such a crisis had happened 20, 30 years ago,
Right.
the natural assumption that I think you would have had, that I would have had, is that the advanced Western societies with their better medical capabilities, better scientific capabilities, better institutions of governance would have handled a crisis like this better. But the record is very clear
Hmm.
that actually the East Asian states are handling this much better. So I think all I'm saying is let us reflect on this. And frankly, you know, for the last 200 years, we in Asia have been, first, we of course colonized and trampled by the West. But after that, when we became independent, we learned from the West and we learned very well. But I say maybe the time has now come for a two-way street of learning where we will continue to learn from the West, but the West can also learn something from us. We need a two-way street of ideas. And I think that's good for the West and good for Asia.
I think George Kennan's advice to be humble is what the West should imbibe or revisit, perhaps, because even in South Asia, India, despite its huge landmass and huge population, has fairly been successful in controlling it. We don't know how it will pan out in the next 15 days or 1 month.
That's
Or
right.
even Sri Lanka, a small
Yeah,
island nation, has really shown the way in South Asia.
that's
So
right.
you're right about the Asians doing this. And in your Economist article, you talk about the Asian century now really beginning? Although we have been talking about it, you have been speaking about it for some time now, for 20 years at least. But now, do you really see it's an inflection point that the Asian century is really now upon us?
Yeah, on that point, I'm actually very confident that I'll be proven right, but not just because of what's happening on COVID 19. Let's move COVID 19 aside.
Sure.
Just at some
Yeah.
point, we'll overcome it. But the most important statistic, which I keep repeating over and over again, is that if you look at a human history, especially over the last 2,000 years, from the year 1 to the year 1820, consistently, the two largest economies of the world were always those of China and India. So it's only in the last 200 years that Europe has taken off and North America has taken off. But so it's very clear that when you view the past 200 years of world history against the backdrop of the past 2,000 years of world history, the past 200 years of world history have been a major historical aberration.
Hmm.
It took tremendous underperformance on the part of Chinese and Indians for the West to dominate the world so strongly. But that all that is an aberration has ended. So it's perfectly natural to see the return of China and India. But of course, what's surprising is how fast this is happening. In the case of China, for example, in 1980, 40 years ago, in purchasing power parity terms, the Chinese GNP was 10%. Now, let me repeat that: 10% of the United States.
Yes. Yeah.
By 2014, it had become bigger. And today, if you look at PPP terms, the top four economies in the world are number one, China; number two, United States; number three, India; number four, Japan. Three out of the top four are Asian. So
Asia
the Asian century is here.
is already here.
Oh,
You
so
proved it.
and the momentum is growing. And if I'm speaking to you 20 years from now, if I'm around, I'm confident by far the largest middle classes in the world will all be in Asia. The demand for everything is going to come from Asia. So the center of gravity of the world's economy is just going to continue moving to Asia because the Asians finally have woken up. And I know, and for example, in the case of India, if they uh, if it can just achieve, like 50%, 25% of the average income of the Indians in America, and Indians are the top performing ethnic group in America, India's economy will be phenomenal.
Yes.
And that can happen. Why? Of course, it's going to happen.
Exactly. But going by what's happening in India, you've been watching India. I'm sure you were in India. We met in Pune recently in January.
Right.
And what's your sense that you get? Where does India underperform even today? What is it holding back India from really sort of unleashing its potential, which all of us agree it's there, but somehow it's not coming through.
Well, it's a complicated story, but I will cut it down to two words, okay? And if you don't mind, I'll use China as an example.
Yes, please.
Why did China, which until 1820 had the world's largest economy, collapse so badly and was trampled, as you know, by the Western powers? Territory was seized. They suffered, as you know, a century of humiliation. Why did that happen? Because the Chinese thought that the way to keep strong is to build walls and cut yourself off from the rest of the world. So when the British came knocking on the door, remember Lord Macartney, the Qing Emperor said, "We don't need anything from you. We have everything." And that was a major mistake. And then the next question is, how did China bounce back so quickly? And the simple answer is global engagement. The Chinese decided we have to open up our economy and compete with the rest of the world. And I think the Chinese learned that lesson from their two neighbors, because they have North Korea and South Korea as a neighbor, and they are friends of North Korea, not friends of South Korea. But
Yes.
North Korea closed itself up, went down in its economic growth. South Korea opened its. And my message to Indians, as a fellow Indian, is that we Indians, we are among the most competitive peoples in the world.
True.
I have first cousins. I'm Sindhi. I have first cousins. in South America, Guyana and Suriname, in United States, in Texas and New York, in London, in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Hong Kong, in Tokyo. And you know what? They're all doing very well. Doesn't matter. You give Indians any environment, they will succeed.
They'll flourish.
So,
Yes.
so India, therefore, and this is what is the missing link here. Indians should have the cultural confidence to say, we can compete, we'll open up our economies, there'll be short term creative destruction, some industries will die, but we will win in that long run. And that's why I must say, one of the most tragic things that happened recently, and I really was very, very sad when I heard that, when India decided to move away from the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP. Now, there are some legitimate concerns India has. There are some legitimate concerns that there will be too many Chinese products coming in, your trade deficit might be too big, but you can work out bilateral arrangements, to manage that, but still join the rest of the agreement, improve your trade with Southeast Asia, with Japan, with South Korea, and the others. And the other important historical fact that very few Indians know is that out of the 10 member states of ASEAN, 9 of them have an Indic or Indian cultural base. This is your natural territory.
Right.
Why are you frightened in competing in areas where Indian culture has been influential for 1,000, 2,000 years? So what's holding you back? You
I
know?
think very wise counsel. I think Professor Mahbubani. I think India will rethink, if I am not mistaken, the RCEP issue to join the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and also there are green shoots in the crisis where labor laws and other reforms, economic reforms, are now being unleashed by state governments in India. They've already done, some of them have already started, have been announced since the last 2 3 days, and we are hoping that this crisis will present an opportunity for
Mhm.
the second wave of reforms that we are all waiting for in India. But thank you very much for your time and your wise counsel.
Mhm.
I think we'll keep coming back and asking you for
Yeah.
your advice and your inputs. But great talking to you, Professor.
Yeah, yeah, but I want to emphasize I'm very optimistic for India, so I hope that I can play a helpful role in making sure that India also succeeds.
We'll look forward to that, and thank you very much for your time. And to our viewers, don't forget to like us on our social media handles, and of course, keep sending our feedback. You are on StratNews Global, and I was in conversation with Professor Mehbubani. Thank you very much.
Thank you.